So I like to write humorous and devious erotica, and sometimes it's on the middle of the spectrum of devious and erotic, humorous and devious, and this one's a little more closer to the devious side, so just, let's just have fun. Let's just have fun. Let's just have fun. It's called The Lost Dog. The gate was closed, but two mysterious hands snatched an old Jack Russell Terrier right out of the yard. The cancerous dog didn't have much strength to bark, as it was stolen away like a child bride. The next day, signs were on every pole with the dog's picture and a phone number. It was like a bad case of the crabs. The signs were everywhere. Everywhere. In the sheets, not yet. Eventually, the call came up on Garrett's silenced phone, but he was at work and let it go to voicemail. On the way home, Garrett listened to the message from a guy that said he had seen Sniffles. The guy said his name was Colin. He lived in the area, and he asked for Garrett to call him back. Garrett got home, but he didn't get comfortable before calling Colin. Colin answered and said, "Hello, I know where your dog is at." Garrett was relieved because his parents blamed him for Sniffles' assured death and said, "Man, that's awesome! Where can I meet you?" "I'm outside." Garrett didn't know how nearby Colin lived, but he walked out to the sidewalk and introduced himself and said, "Hi, my name's Garrett." Garrett had light green eyes, long brown bangs, and a goofy smile. "Garrett, it's good to meet you." Colin shook Garrett's firm hand. He had a good handshake for a smaller guy. Colin was taller and really glad to meet him. His wide smile said it all. "Where's my dog?" Garrett took back his hand and said, "She's been real bad sick. We don't know how she got out. She can barely walk." "What's wrong with her?" "She had a growth on her stomach removed and did some more chemo a couple of days ago." Garrett felt his stomach sink as he thought of Sniffles dying. He rubbed his arm and said, "Can you take me to her?" He wanted to save her life and withdrew the question of how Colin knew where he lived. This way, Colin militantly led Garrett up the road. Colin turned and asked him, "Garrett, are you in school?" "Yeah." "Are you at the university or the state college?" "State." Garrett followed Colin through the unknown backyards. "What are you studying?" Colin dodged a limb. "Business." "What do you do?" Garrett asked. Colin stopped and said, "I work in an office." He was very nonchalant and said, "This is where I saw your dog." "Where you saw her? I thought you knew where she was." Garrett was upset and called for Sniffles. Colin called for her too, and they looked around. Garrett and Colin walked back to Garrett's house calling for her. Garrett was tired and said, "Thanks for helping, man. Call me if you see her. I'm going inside." Colin shook his hand and walked down the sidewalk. But the next day, Garrett received a picture message from Colin of Sniffles and a message saying, "My mom hates having the sniffles." Garrett left work early and called Colin. Colin answered and said, "Garrett, Sniffles is perfectly fine." Garrett was really relieved and asked, "Where did you find her?" "I didn't find her." "Okay, where can I pick her up?" Garrett got ready for directions. "I'll meet you at your house." Garrett met Colin outside and they walked up the street to a duplex. The inside of the place looked clean and dusted. But the worst screaming Garrett had ever heard was coming from upstairs. Garrett looked at Colin and asked, "What is that?" "That's my mom. She's still playing with Sniffles. She doesn't like people, but she hates dogs even more." Colin sat on the couch and turned on the television. He scratched his crotch and looked at Garrett. Garrett didn't know what to say, but attempted to say, "Can you please go get my dog?" "Do you have a girlfriend?" Colin thought Garrett was very attractive, and his question sounded that way. Colin tried to hold it back, but his eyes couldn't discard Garrett's VPL, visible penis line, in his shorts. Garrett felt backed into a corner and told the truth. "Yeah? what does your girlfriend look like? I want my dog. Does she give gray head? Colin glared at Garrett. His mouth was wet. Garrett was surprised but started to storm upstairs and said, I'll go up there and get my dog if you won't. His voice quivered with anger and fear. His hands made fists. I wouldn't do that. She's pretty psycho. Come sit. Colin patted the couch. Why won't you just get my dog? Because you're just too damn cute, Colin laughed. Thanks, but I only like girls. How do you know? I know. Have you ever felt something for a guy? Garrett was fed up and said, you know what? I'll go bring my dad over here for Sniffles. My mom isn't going to keep it that long. Plus, she really hates the sound the door makes. Colin looked at Garrett and said, now, answer my question. You ever felt anything for a guy? Never. Garrett was sure of it. He never dreamed of being gay. He didn't mind gay guys as long as they knew the boundaries. But Garrett was often the target of gay guys and became very quietly intolerant of them. Have you ever played on a baseball team? Colin watched Garrett's face remember. Garrett answered and said, yeah? You never liked one of your teammates? No. Garrett was tired of standing against the banister and sat on the stairs, but he couldn't really ignore the screaming as well as Colin. Colin continued and said, there wasn't ever a best friend you spent the nights with and thought about? Garrett remembered one guy on his team that was different, as Colin tried to peer up the thigh of his shorts. Garrett couldn't remember the guy's name, but he remembered things about their friendship he had forgotten. Garrett said, I remember a guy on the team being friendly with me all the time. Like how? You can come sit over here, I'm not going to hurt you. Garrett thought the couch looked comfortable and went over to sit as he told Colin a story. I can't remember his name, but he had me over a few times. The last time I was over, I woke up to him sucking on my dick. I pushed him off after I got off. I didn't know what to do. I left and never talked about it. Wasn't it a dream? Garrett hadn't thought about that in years, but Colin was acting like he knew the story already, and Garrett wondered to Colin, did you play baseball with me? Believe me, I've gotten better, Garrett. When was your last blowjob? Colin talked over the disturbing noises upstairs. What? Garrett knew when it was, but he didn't want Colin to keep asking him questions like that and said, it's been a while, man. Tell me about it. Colin put his hand on Garrett's thigh. Garrett told him, the girl I'm with now hasn't even seen my penis. Can I see your penis? Colin went there. Garrett knew this was the guy and that he could let it out. Garrett opened his pants, Colin opened his gob, and brown pubic hair led to Garrett's resting cock like a brunette brick road leading home. You're the guy! Garrett insidiously pulled his pants down to his spry ankles as the color of the room changed. Colin was amazed and asked, why hasn't your new girlfriend seen it? It's lovely. Colin went to touch it, but Garrett's hand grabbed his wrist. He looked at Colin and said, she hasn't asked. He looked frustrated and said, I'll let you touch it, but first you have to get my dog and we take this back to my room. At my house. No, you'll lock me out or something. Get your dad. No, I won't. Colin heard the sinister sincerity and agreed. He felt like he could trust Garrett. Garrett had his pants up as Colin brought Sniffles downstairs. Garrett was excited to see her and carried her home. Sniffles got her medicine and Garrett told his parents he and Colin were going to go upstairs to play Mortal Kombat. You know, a game his parents would recognize. Once his door shut, Garrett pulled his shirt over his head. His tanned body stretched rigid as Colin stood and waited with his arms crossed like an impatient spectator. Colin didn't know what to expect as Garrett kicked his shoes off and threw his belt off. Garrett looked at Colin and said, see, I didn't lie. Garrett stood with his shorts partly open. Colin and he were about the same, well, but Colin, he was about the same height, almost, but Colin was a little bit taller. But Colin was blonde instead of brown, too, and he had more meat on his bones. Colin wanted Garrett so badly. He watched as Garrett slid his shorts off and became completely naked. On his knees, Colin sucked down Garrett's cock. It was rapidly growing, but Garrett said, Colin, you've gotten better, but you're not as good as me. Colin removed his mouth and said, what do you mean by that? No, keep going. I know you want to. Colin sucked Garrett, but he was feeling timid and clumsy. He held Garrett's hard shaft and got a good rhythm going. He hit his teeth and had a wet hole. He banged the middle of his shaft with the middle of his wide tongue like a shield in battle. Colin's tongue circled and slurped as his hand stroked, and when his mouth got ready to go lower, Colin placed his hands on Garrett's smooth sides. He swallowed Garrett's entire cock, came up, went back down, came up, went back down, and over again. Garrett was getting close to blasting and said, Okay, you've proved your point. Colin took a breath as Garrett sat down on his bed and rolled onto his back. His feet ran up the side of the headboard. His dick was long, thick, and weighty. His feet rolled over his head and his thin body folded. Colin watched in hushed awe as Garrett sucked up his lengthy cock. Colin said, "Wow, I can't do that." Garrett sucked up and down his own shaft with his non-existent stomach folding the universe like a wormhole. He didn't do it quietly either. He sounded like a pig at the trough.
Shit.
In there. Garrett looked up from his trough and said, "Now get out." "What? You heard me. You were being cruel and keeping sniffles." Garrett sucked his cock some more, but stopped when he saw Colin hadn't even started to move and said, "Get the fuck out." "Do you swallow it?" "You already know too much." Colin hopped up on the bed, sucked up Garrett's cock, and tried blocking Garrett's head. But Garrett headbutted Colin and started sucking his own dick again. Yet Colin came back and held Garrett's ass, which pushed Garrett's long cock further down his throat, making Garrett come. And Garrett's mouth was the lucky recipient. But he had to suck with everything in him as Colin attempted to get some of that cum for himself. But Garrett's mouth popped off his dick with a nefarious laughter. And Colin left with his own sniffles.